Do we go up to heaven, or does heaven come down to us? If you've ever asked or wondered that question, this video is for you. If you've never asked or wondered that question, maybe you are wondering it now. Actually a fairly complicated theological conversation, and then it has lots of variables in the conversation. One of the variables that we need to discuss is that many times what we envision about heaven. And so first, as believers, as followers of Jesus, we believe in something called heaven, where followers of Jesus will end up or be. Here is some of the issue. Much of our Western understanding of heaven, or our modern understanding of heaven, is not necessarily true. Like, we see movies or cartoons or videos or whatever, and we picture heaven as this kind of spiritual realm where people float around. Maybe they have wings, we lay on clouds, so on and so forth. We also have let Greek thought really, it just has affected kind of Western thought in general. And so we hear things in the church like, one day I'm just going to be able to get rid of this body, this flesh, this brokenness, this sin, and escape and become this very spiritual thing that is good. That's actually an early heresy that the church fought against, called Gnosticism. There's lots of forms of Gnosticism, and we're not going to go into what that is, but a more biblical understanding is that God created the spiritual world and matter in the physical world and how we know the earth. And he said that it was good. And it's actually God's intention that we live in a place like this, with trees and wind and things we can knock on, like wood. That was corny. And in the biblical story, what we see is originally in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1, is this beautiful kind of story and picture of kind of the spiritual realm we would call heaven and the physical realm we would call earth coexisting. This place where God walks with Adam in the cool of the day. It's this beautiful picture. And when sin enters into the story and corrupts reality, these two things are separated. Heaven is removed from earth. So that's the first thing. And again, this is a really long conversation and topic, but that's the first thing we should know. So the biblical story, part of the biblical story, and what Jesus does is he is renewing and bringing about creation as it was intended, where heaven and earth coexist. And we see this in one of the last chapters of the last books of the Bible, Revelation chapter 21. We see this beautiful image and picture of what happens at the end. So after Jesus comes back and makes everything right, what is he doing? In Revelation 21, verse 1, we read this: "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth." And so when you hear new, think kind of renewed. So in early in Genesis, we're told that the whole world was destroyed with the flood, right? So it doesn't mean it ceased to exist, but what it was significantly different than what it was to become. And so there's this kind of renewal. So think that imagery. The first earth had passed away and the sea was no more. And then I saw the holy city, this new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband, right? And so one of the things we believe, which is kind of one of the crazier things we believe, probably, I don't know, we actually believe a lot of crazy things, is the idea of the resurrection of the dead, that when Jesus comes back, we will be resurrected. Like, our bodies will be made new and complete and whole with no sin. So we'll still have flesh and bone and blood, and heaven will come back down, and the biblical story will be complete. And so heaven comes down to earth, which actually has a lot of implications for how we live our faith in the here and now, the things we care about. A lot of times what we see in evangelical churches is this distinction of spiritual and material, and how the spiritual is greater and grander than the material. And in the biblical worldview, that's not necessarily true. Spiritual and material are both important. And so this idea has huge implications for our lives of lived theology. As the question was originally posed, do we go up to heaven, or does heaven come down to us? In the end, we read that heaven comes down to us. And there are other places in the Bible that make it seem as if once we die, we are in the presence of the Lord right then as spiritual beings, that our souls live on. But still, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is God renewing and making the earth as it should be, where heaven and earth coexist. So, hope that you enjoyed this. Sorry that I'm at home and the phone was wiggly because I don't have my tech stuff here. But as always, love you, praying for you, and I'll see you next time.